This video is sponsored by the Ides of March. More about their 40k and AOS Grand Tournaments later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated armies from the past weekend of competitive play. And oh boy, despite the massive snowstorms currently engulfing most of the continental United States, we still had tons of events put up results, especially from elsewhere in the world, that have come back with some absolutely insane wins. And we can take a look at that, looking through our metagame breakdown. First of all, we do still see Necrons as kind of the undefeated champions of the metagame so far, with 4 event wins under their belt at the Swordwind Winter GT, Wishing It Was LVO GT, Great Game Gongai GT, and Gangs GT at CastleCon. However, we see a bunch of other lists, especially a ton of different Space Marine chapters with multiple undefeated results. That includes Astra Militarum at the CanCon 40k Open, as well as Second City Games GT January, Tau Empire taking down Uprising Adelaide, as well as Ironclaws Wargaming South Mills. Ultramarines took down only 2 events this week. They decided to take it a little bit easy on us this time around, taking down the Golden Crew 2 and Hamburg Major. Space Wolves also looking very good at the Hamburg Major, as well as winning Nigel's Nuttas. I do want to mention that the Hamburg Major was a large event, however, only ran 5 rounds, so it ended up with 4 undefeated at the end. So we are going to be seeing a lot of representation from that particular event on this list. Blood Angels also representing some Space Marines at the Swordwind Winter GT, as well as Winchester 40k GT. Salamanders burning down the Hobby Henchman January GT. Deathwatch winning the VT 40k GT. Drukhari and Emperor's Children also both undefeated at the Hamburg Major. Aeldari winning the DPW GT1. World Eaters winning the GF GT3. It's kind of alliterative. I like that one. As well as Deathguard, last but certainly not least, also undefeated at the Ironclaws Wargaming South Mills GT. And last but certainly not least, Tyranids also going undefeated at the CanCon 40k Open with an absolutely insane list that I am excited to talk about. So let's get into it just after a word from our sponsors. This video is sponsored by the Ides of March, which, in addition to being a date, is also the date for a Warhammer 40k and AOS GT. Ides of March is a multi-game event held every year in Central March at the gorgeous Samoset Resort in Rockport, Maine. This event venue features stunning views and an absolutely incredible locale, and you can enjoy those views while playing Warhammer 40k. The event will feature not only a 100-player Warhammer 40k Major, but also a similar-sized event for Age of Sigmar, as well as events for Blood Bowl and Star Wars Shatterpoint. Not to mention, it's also featuring a painting competition for those who are more hobby inclined. I'll be there live streaming the event, so I'll see you there as well, as long as you head down to the links in the video description or hit the QR code on screen to get your tickets to the Ides of March today. And I'll see you there March 13th through 15th, 2026. So we're going to start with our metagame frontrunners, Necrons, and for that we're going to go over to the Great Game Gongai Winter GT, where AJ Edman won the event with a 5-0 record with a Star Shatter Arsenal list. Now, there was a lot of representation from Star Shatter Arsenal in a couple of different builds using this detachment, but I imagine that this is likely to be a relatively standard composition. This includes a Catan shard of the Deceiver, as well as a shard of the Nightbringer. Nice thing about the Deceiver is that anti-character is oftentimes very useful. It can deal mortal wounds. It is difficult to kill in return because of his stealth. Plus, a redeployment is very useful, especially for large units like the Silent King. We have Necrosaur Amintar, as well as a Technomancer with Chrono Impedance Fields for -1 damage, and the Silent King himself. Following that up, we have a Canoptek Reanimator, a unit of Canoptek Tomb Crawlers, so we can attach those in alongside the Technomancer into the Wraith unit to make them beefier. We do have a big unit of Wraiths for the Technomancer to hop into. He's going to hover around the midboard of the table in order to apply that -1 damage from the Chrono Impedance Fields to the Silent King. And then also you have this big beefy unit that you can use Eternal Servitude for end-of-turn reanimations on, as well as a reactive move to keep them alive and just dominate primary in the center of the battlefield. We have a unit of Death Marks, Flayed Ones, Ophidian Destroyers, and Tomb Blades for utility, plus a Triarch Stalker, which is a good early game threat with scout moves and the ability to be targeted with Chrono Impedance Fields on turn 1 before the Silent King pushes forward. But then, once you're in that mid-game stage and the Silent King wants to take over the middle of the table, you can apply that -1 damage to him and apply a front line of Catan shards alongside the Silent King, -1 damage and strong strong save and invulnerable save characteristics, so very difficult to get through, not to mention access to the rerolls from the Silent King's auras on top of that. Incredibly strong composition, very consistent at scoring, so it stands to reason we would see multiple players with a similar build go undefeated. Now, with that, we're going to move over to Astra Militarum, and we had a couple of undefeated results, but what we're going to be talking about is Nemo the Fish in his win at the Second City Games GT January. Nemo is back on his recon element stuff, and for those who don't recognize the name, Nemo, or Wesley St. Heinz, as he is sometimes registered in events as, took down the Las Vegas Open this past year using a recon element guard list, as well as winning the T5S2, my online competitive series, with a very similar build. And he's back with it with this very slightly different build than what we've seen previously. I do have an entire video where I talk very explicitly about how these recon element guard lists work, and I'll link that in the video description, but as a bit of a rundown, this list is able to stack just an enormous number of defensive mechanics on top of the baseline hyper-efficient high OC very fast Guardsman body. So you're able to take what is essentially a baseline 4+ save body that's incredibly cheap with 4 OC once you attach a command squad and apply duty and honor to them at a baseline movement of 9. And if you have enough orders, especially end of turn order capacity or end of phase order capacity, then you have the ability to switch between the orders that you need at any one time. Recon element can then also apply a -1 to hit effect, to feel no pain, a reactive move, and an anti-charge effect to make it so that these units are basically possible to efficiently counter. And then it's just going to take the hundreds and hundreds of objective control characteristic that it has available to it to push you off objectives and prevent you from scoring entirely. In this case, Nemo was bringing a pair of Cadian Castellans, as well as 3 Cadian command squads and Ursula Creed. We do have 3 units of 20 Cadian shock troopers, so we have attachments for Creed, plus the Castellans, plus all of the command squads to attach into them, and that gives you the order capacity to basically order almost the entire army with Master Voxes from those command squads. That said, we also are bringing a Tempestus command squad, so we have an end-of-phase order coming out of reserve, as well as Gaunt's Ghosts for an additional 2 end-of-phase orders that can come out of reserve, plus 2 Ogryn bodyguards to attach in with those command squads and make them even beefier. The Cadian Castellans are very important here because they give the unit sustained hits as well as fallback and shoot. And the Cadian command squads give you the permanent access to permanent cover, essentially making these guys what is effectively a 3+ armor save. Plus, they could be buffed up in addition with the Ogryn bodyguards for additional wound capacity. We then have a single Scout Sentinel, mostly to blank bring it down when it's drawn from on your opponent's side, and 2 units of Attilan Rough Riders, which can act as late game counterattack. The nice thing here is that oftentimes your opponent is going to be forced to push into the brick of Cadians and Catachans in order to actually gain any leeway on the primary, which then allows the Attilan Rough Riders to just either come out of strategic reserve or come out of the hidey hole, a pocket where they can hide, and counterattack with a bunch of Melta Lances. The actual infantry in the list is composed of 2 units of Krieg Combat Engineers for some early game scouts, a Tempestus Scion unit to attach the Tempestus Command Squad, in addition to 4 units of 10 Death Corps of Krieg, 2 units of 20 Catachan Jungle Fighters, so even more scouting offense, plus 3 units of 20 Cadian Shock Troopers. That gives us a grand total of 140 battle line infantry that can all be between OC3 and OC4 with access to duty and honor, plus the regimental standard in the Cadian command squads. Again, if you want even more discussion about how this list works, you can check out my coverage of the LVO finals when Nemo took that one down. But congratulations to him on going back to his element and taking it out another GT with this list. Now, moving on over to Tau Empire, Jono Bishop took down the Uprising Adelaide with a Mont Ka detachment. We've been seeing a lot of play from Mont Ka recently, and while there is a little bit of build variety inside the detachment, a lot of the hallmarks of this list are going to look very similar. In this case, Jono was playing an Enforcer Commander, that one equipped with missile pods to attach into a Fire Knife battlesuit team. That goes alongside a Broadside battlesuit unit. These guys are rocking heavy rail rifles as well as their missile drones. But the nice thing there is that between them and any of the other big sort of offensive units inside this build, you can use coordinated, you can use the stratagem to get both of them +1 AP targeting a single enemy unit. That puts the Fire Knife battlesuits up to a pretty strong offensive profile. While their strength and AP characteristics are relatively limited with their missile pods, they do get hit rerolls, and then that will benefit from the lethal hits from the detachment ability very well, and the improved AP, so we could push them up to AP2 ignore cover, which at that point starts to very concretely immediately knock out enemy utility units. We have 2 Ethereals. These guys are nice because you get very consistent command point generation with 2 shots at rolling a 4+ in order to generate one of them, as well as you get additional marker drones from these guys so they can actually use those to spot enemies. We have a single Devilfish to attach in one of our Pathfinder teams, a Ghost Kill Battlesuit for some early game offense, 1 Ion Cannon Hammerhead, objective secured provided from a Kroot Carnivore squad, 2 Piranhas for additional scout and forward operation, 2 Riptide Battlesuits for some long-range shooting with ion accelerators, 2 units of stealth battlesuits, as well as a Vespid Stingwing squad for some up-down utility, and then the pièce de résistance is 30 Pathfinders, 3 units of 10. One of those is going to be equipped with a Grab Inhibitor drone. The other ones all have recon drones, so they get that infiltrate and scout. So we have a scouting unit of Pathfinders inside a Devilfish. They can use the advanced disembark capacity of the Devilfish to push themselves up the table. The other units can just absorb the midboard and with their scout effect, reposition themselves to attack on turn 1. So you get a huge alpha strike from the Piranhas, from the Pathfinders, from the Devilfish, all on the first turn of the game. Even if your opponent is very defensively oriented, you can jail them into their side of the table and then take table space with your ranged attackers, things like your broadside battlesuits and your fire knives and your riptide battlesuits. And then on turn 2 onwards, just start to basically lay waste to them by getting lines of sight around the sides of the table. And that's even on a very defensive terrain deployment. If things are open, then you could potentially use your auto 6 advances and army-wide assault in order to inflict an alpha strike on your opponent that they probably can't recover from. Pretty classic stuff for Mon-Ka here. So with that, we're going to move into Space Marines. Settle in, because we're going to be here for a little while. Starting with the Golden Crew 2, we could talk about Ultramarines. Michelle Silvestri took that one down with a Blade of Ultramar detachment. And we're seeing a push towards these more heavily armored Ultramarine builds that are focusing on things like Dreadnoughts and Repulsors in order to go alongside their armored infantry units like Victrix Honor Guard and their characters like Robute Gilliman. That being said, we see a Captain in Gravis armor with the Armor of Antoninus to make him really hard to kill, a combi weapon lieutenant, Robute Gilliman, and Calgar, an intercessor squad, incursor, and infiltrator squad for utility, plus 1 Victrix Honor Guard unit, a pair of Repulsor Executioners, a Redemptor Dreadnought, and a Vindicator. Kind of a callback a little bit to the original Ultramarine Gladius Task Force list that we saw at the start of last year that were focusing on things like Dreadnoughts and Vindicators to be very heavily armored, but also fast thanks to the detachment ability, with lots of utility coming from characters like the Combi Lieutenant and the Gravis Armored Captain. I don't know if I have much else to say about Ultramarines. These armies have been successful for a really long time, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. That said, we can move over to Space Wolves, who had some success this week, which is nice to see. Anthony Baranato took down the Nigel's Nuttis event with a Saga of the Great Wolf. This included Arjak Rockfist, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, a Terminator Captain with Grimnar's Mark, so he's able to rapid ingress for free in addition to another unit coming in on the same turn. We then have a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, Logan Grimnar, and a Wolfguard Battle Leader with Skald's Foretelling to give him Lance. From there, things are relatively simple. We have a couple of utility units in the form of a Scout Squad, Incursor Squad, and Intercessor Squad, as well as a pair of Redemptor Dreadnoughts. The nice thing here is that they have access to Armor of Contempt in this detachment, unlike a lot of the other Space Wolves detachments, although it's called something different. It's called Foe Foreseen. In addition to getting +1 to wound from Eye of the Pack, which is good on a unit that has the attack volume of a Redemptor Dreadnought, and it also gets the benefit of multiple of the Sagas of the Great Wolf. That includes reroll advance and charge, +1 to hit in ranged, and sustained hits in melee. All of those are effective on a unit as well-rounded as the Redemptor Dreadnought. From there, we have a unit of 6 Wolfguard Head Takers, taking Mastercrafted Power Weapons, the paired version for the 6 attack profile to attach with the sustained hits and lance from the Wolfguard Battle Leader, but we also see Hunting Wolves attached to these guys as well, so they're going to be able to bring an additional utility unit to complement the other utility that the army's bringing, and the number of characters that we're taking in this particular army means that those Hunting Wolves are going to get their OC bonus in order to act as action monkeys across a wide breadth of the table. But then we have 15 Wolfguard Terminators and 3 units of 5. Pretty simple attachments for the Grimnar's Mark Terminator Captain, plus Arjak Rockfist plus Logan Grimnar. And the ability to bring one of those in on turn 1 and rapid ingress 2 of them on turn 2, thanks to that Grimnar's Mark, means that these guys can bully up the middle of the table pretty reliably and put a lot of that -1 to wound, high save characteristic, heavy infantry in the center of the battlefield from a very early turn of the game. Very well-rounded list, which befits a lot of Space Wolf archetypes, but it's also cool to see a list that plays so well into a lot of the unique effects that the Saga of the Great Wolf are able to bring. Now, with that, we'll move over to Blood Angels and talk about Chris Irvine's list from the Swordwind Winter GT. This was a Rage Cursed Onslaught list, and all of the Blood Angels undefeated results this weekend were using Rage Cursed Onslaught. And we've seen a lot about this detachment in the last couple of weeks. This particular build included a Jump Pack Captain, as well as a Chaplain with Carmine Reliquary, one with Master of the Red Thirst, Commander Dante, Lamartis, and a Combi Weapon Lieutenant. We then saw an Intercessor Squad and a bunch of Death Company Marines to join in with those Chaplains and Lamartis. We saw one 5-man to join with the Carmine Reliquary unit to get that scout early game offense. One 10-man to go with the Fights First Chaplain with Master of the Red Thirst, and one with Lamartis. We then see 3 units of Sanguinary Guard that we can attach the Jump Pack Captain and Dante into, as well as having a smaller unit for utility and trading. Speaking of utility, we also had a Scout Squad and an Intercessor Squad, as well as, interestingly, 2 Death Company Dreadnoughts. These guys are good for the threat overload. You can give them a 5+ feel no pain, so especially alongside the strong defensive characteristics from units like Lamartis as well. These will be able to close out the game after your Death Company have already dealt their damage. And I think especially if you are cycling units into your pocket line of sight blockers in the middle of the table, you're then going to be able to either bring Dreadnoughts out of reserve using Rapid Ingress, or push them into those pockets after they are vacated by the Death Company Marines to then take the middle of the table with strong and resilient defensive profiles. Now, with that, we're sticking with Space Marines, but moving into armies that only had a single undefeated result, and heading over to the Hobby Henchman January GT, which was won by Andy Moore, playing a Firestorm Assault Force. We've talked a lot about Salamanders in the last couple of weeks, but I think one of the reasons you would play Firestorm Assault Force is the prevalence of Necrons right now. It has ended up being the case, so I think Salamanders tend to be very strong in that matchup, because Necrons want to take the middle of the table. Salamanders can do incredible, insane amounts of damage to the center of the table. Plus, in Firestorm Assault Force, you get access to Champion of Humanity, which allows a character, in this case a lieutenant, to give his unit ignore modifiers, which includes the -1 damage characteristic from things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts, Armor of Contempt, and, importantly, Catan Shards, which makes them pretty good in that particular matchup. In this case, we are playing Adrax Agatone, Vulcan Heston, as well as the Champion of Humanity Lieutenant, a Combi Weapon Lieutenant for utility, as well as an Intercessor Squad, Jump Pack Assault Intercessor Squad for utility, and double Incursor Squads. Following that up, we have a big Blade Guard Veteran Squad for Adrax and the Lieutenant to hop into. That gives an Ignore modifier unit that can reroll its own ones to hit, get +1 to wound from Crucible of Battle, and Ignore modifiers with lethal hits as well. We have a Company Hero Squad to attach Vulcan Heston into. We also, importantly, have the ability to enter a transport at the end of the turn with Firestorm Assault Force, which allows Vulcan to potentially hop out, provide his Forge Father buff to the army to give rerolls on your Torrent weapons, and then jump into the transport at the end, assuming that he didn't disembark the same turn. A pair of Infernus Marine squads. Those are going to attach into Impulsors with Iron Hail Sky Talon arrays. This is a nice little combination that gives you just an absolutely insane scenario piece. The Impulsor gives you 22 Strength 5 range attacks within 12 inches, plus 5d6 Strength 6 AP1 auto hits from the Torrent weapons firing off their firing deck. Not to mention the fact that you can also advance and disembark 10 OC worth of Infernus Marines, thanks to Vulcan's OC buff for them, basically anywhere you want them to be. So this unit's good at clearing infantry, it's good at killing utility units, and it's also good at taking objectives. Plus, with the Forge Father buff and +1 strength, shooting something within 12, those Flamers can actually do serious damage to toughness 11 or lower. From there, we also have a Scout Squad and a pair of Land Raider Redeemers. The Redeemers are going to be able to deliver units like the Devastator Squad, as well as the Blade Guard Veterans, very effectively, plus they get the benefits of the Forge Father buff, so a pair of Redeemers shooting into almost anything can do some serious damage, especially because you can stack things like +1 to wound from Oath of Moment with wound reroll rolls from Vulcan. The nice thing I want to call out here too is that Devastator squad with the Incursors, we can get them to hitting on 3s, which means their attacks are much more consistent than they would normally be. They also have an Armorium Cherub, so they're at once per game able to auto 6 an attack. And if they're shooting their Oath of Moment target, they can be Strength 10 with +1 to wound if they end up in melter range. So that little unit for 120 points on its Oath of Moment target can actually do some pretty insane damage, even more so alongside the buff from Forgefather to give it wound rerolls. In some cases, you also take this guy with Razorbacks because they are Firstborn Space Marines, so they can go into the smaller transports, and then they get wound rerolls baked in from the Razorback. But the Razorback profile is relatively expensive these days, so it is a little tough to include in the army. Now, rounding out the Space Marine factions for this week, let's talk about Deathwatch and move over to the VT 40k GT, where Steven Vox from Vanguard Tactics went 5-0 with a Black Spear Task Force. This included a Gravis Captain with the Toe with the Ectoclades, a Judiciar with the Beacon Angelus, a Combi Weapon Lieutenant for utility, as well as a Watchmaster with Thief of Secrets. Interestingly, we also had a Terminator Librarian. Nice thing about this guy is a baked-in sustained hits buff for his unit, in addition to gaining the benefits of special issue ammunition on his own Smite attack, so he can dramatically improve the damage output of a Deathwatch Terminator squad. From there, we're running a pair of Deathwatch veteran squads, 2 10-man squads, one of them for the Watchmaster to hop into with Thief of Secrets to get delivered by a Rhino on the battlefield. The other one will deep strike in with the Beacon Angelus from the Judiciar. That's to allow him to teleport onto the table with rapid ingress and then heroically intervene into something that's fighting one of your kill teams. Speaking of kill teams, we have a pair of Fortis kill teams to bring some indirect fire alongside an Indomitor kill team to act as a hammer blow and backline support from an Infiltrator squad. Last but certainly not least is a 10 model Deathwatch Terminator squad that's equipped with 7 Storm Shield Terminators and 3 Cyclone Missile Launcher Terminators. That gives you a huge bulwark of high wound count, offensively oriented melee unit. They gain the benefits of that sustained hits from the Terminator Librarian. So regardless of the mission tactic, they're going to be able to get that sustained effect on both their melee and their ranged attacks, in addition to hiding those 3 Cyclone Missile Launcher shots behind a massive bulwark of those Storm Shield models. Very interesting inclusion here. Usually we'll see smaller units of Deathwatch Terminators in order to act as trading pieces in the early game. A lot of times what you'll do is play these units aggressively in order to force enemies to commit into them. Then you can counterattack with the Indomitor kill teams to clear them out. However, in this case, we're going to be using that Deathwatch Terminator squad as a little bit more of a bulwark. Very, very cool to see a very different style of Deathwatch. Despite the fact that most of the units are the same, the inclusion of that big Terminator brick changes things quite a bit. Now, moving on from Space Marines, let's move over to our first list from the Hamburg Major, this being Drukhari. Paul Ponskin went undefeated there at 5-0 with a Spectacle of Spite list. This included Drazar, Lady Malice, Lilith Hesperax, as well as a Succubus with Morgana's Curse. We had 1 unit of Cabalite Warriors, as well as 3 Witch units, a Raider, 3 Venoms in order to split those Witch units into 5s, 2 units of Hellions, both 10-mans to emphasize their damage output, an Incubus unit for some late game aggression, a Mandrake squad, 2 units of Reavers, 1 unit of 6, as well as a unit of 3, as well as a pair of Dark Lance Scourges. The inclusion of the Cabalite Warrior squad is interesting here. Definitely gives the Raider a little bit of extra utility since you're going to be able to obsec off of that thing. Or I guess you could split it into 2 units of 5 by using a Venom, but I imagine it's a bunker for Lady Malice where she can grant lethal or sustained to all of the shooting attacks from that Cabalite Warrior squad. And then we have an Incubi unit for Drazar to hop into to get +1 to wound. Now, sticking with the Hamburg Major, we can talk about Emperor's Children. Manuel Weyand went undefeated with a Coterie of the Conceited at that event, taking largely normal Coterie of the Conceited stuff with a little bit of spice. This included 3 Winged Demon Princes, 1 with Pledge of Unholy Fortune, 3 Lord Exultants to attach to 3 Infractor squads, plus a Tormentor unit, 2 Chaos Rhinos to carry them around, 2 Noise Marine squads to go with them, and a Chaos Spawn unit for utility. Last, and definitely not least, 2 units of Flawless Blades. These guys are very interesting in Coterie of the Conceited. Once you have your Coterie buffs active, they're going to be basically the late game damage dealers for the army. If you can unlock your buffs early by using things like the Noise Marines, the Lord's Exultant, and to a lesser extent the Demon Princes, the Flawless Blades go absolutely insane with sustained hits and rerolls on an already very high impact melee attack with that critical wounds on 3+ against literally everything. These guys with all of the buffs active can actually just one-tap large heavy vehicles, even just by themselves. Other than that inclusion, however, the army is relatively standard Emperor's Children fare. Moving on to Aeldari, we're going to go over to the DPW GT1, where Peter Herbild went 5-0 with a Seer Council list. We actually talked about Seer Council very recently on the show, and it seems like with a lot of the other Eldar archetypes being nerfed, it has come out as one of the higher performing ones. This included Eldred Ulthran, a Farseer, Fuegan, Janezar, Lycus, as well as a pair of Warlocks, one with the Torque of Morag Hague, in order to apply a command point tax effect once per turn to an enemy nearby. We do have 2 Guardian Defender squads. That's for the Warlocks, Eldred, and the Farseer to attach into. There are a pair of Warlock There are a trio of Warlock Conclaves as well that can attach into these units. So we can have both of these bricks attached with the Warlocks to apply. So we can have both of these bricks attached with both the Conclave unit to give them -1 to wound and the standard Warlock to reduce incoming charges. All of them are going to get the benefit of empowered destructors from being in units with other Warlocks. And then they act as solid delivery systems for Eldred or the Farseer. We do also have a D-Cannon support weapon platform that can attach into the Guardian Defender squad as well. While we can't use the Farseer's effect to manipulate the dice rolls on the D-Cannon platform, we can do so on the Bright Lance in that unit, which improves their damage output pretty significantly. And then the Storm Guardians can attach with Eldred and benefit from his Doom for +1 to wound, which is good on the multiple Flamers and Fusion Guns that unit also gets access to. From there, we have a Fire Dragon unit, plus a pair of Howling Banshee squads, 2 Striking Scorpion units, as well as a Warwalker unit and a Warp Spider unit for utility. We can combo together the Doom from Eldred for +1 to wound with the +1 AP from the Warwalkers to allow any of these units to hit dramatically above their weight class. That puts a massive amount of damage coming from the Warlocks in any of these units, each of them able to fire hugely powerful torrent attacks. You also have Unshrouded Truth to deliver those units or units like the Fire Dragons into Melta range for Fuegan and the Fire Pike on the Exarch, while being able to pressure your opponent, while being able to clear screens in order to enable that and pressure your opponent with the Striking Scorpion and Howling Banshee units. Through the use of your Fate dice to unlock free stratagems like Unshrouded Truth, and the use of that additional Warlock Conclave that can push around and act as an additional Psyker in order to unlock the stratagems for the detachment, this army can enact an insane control game plan with an alpha strike from units like the Fire Dragons or the Storm Guardians, in addition to tons of defensive and reactive effects enabled by its other stratagems. Now we're going to move over to World Eaters and discuss the GFGT3. This was won by William Axelson, who is playing a World Eaters Berserker warband. This included Angron, Karn the Betrayer, a Slaughterbound with Berserker Glaive, a unit of 10 Khorne Berserkers to attach with Karn and go into a single Chaos Rhino. We are seeing a return of the Forge Friends back into the list. This is certainly helpful, given the fact that a lot of the heavy infantry in the metagame, especially things like Victrix Honor Guard, are now prey again to Forge Fiends, so they are going to be good into those particular 3-wound profiles, in addition to granting the army just generically some shooting, which is always nice to have. We have 3 units of 2 Chaos Spawn to provide utility for the army, plus a Goremonger unit for infiltration, and a Jackal unit to obsec the backline objective. Following that up, 3 units of 8-bound, 2 units of standard 8-bound, 1 unit of exalted 8-bound to attach in with the Slaughterbound. It's cool to see Angron back in World Eaters list. He's been absent for a really long time. Other than that, and the reintroduction of shooting attacks to the World Eaters repertoire, fairly classic World Eater stuff from this list. Now moving over to Deathguard, we're going to head on to the Iron Claws Wargaming South Mills GT. There were 2 undefeated for this GT, but it ended up being won by Chris Cardamone, who was playing Champions of Contagion Deathguard. This detachment focuses on attached units and their characters, and Chris was taking a ton of them in this case. This included a pair of Malignant Plaguecaster plus Biologus Putrefier combos, alongside 10 model Plague Marine squads to give them lethal, sustained, and enhanced critical hits on all of those attacks. You can also use Rabid Infusion on the units with 2 attached characters to give them fights first, so these things shoot well, hit well in melee, and can defend against other melee attacks fairly well because of access to that fights first. We also have a Lord of Virulence to attach in with a giant Blight Lord Terminator squad, in addition to a Demon Prince of Nurgle to discount the cost of some of those stratagems, especially things like Malignance Magnified, which gives you full hit and wound rerolls, especially useful on on any of these units once they are in the shooting phase, once they have engaged in melee, since a lot of them will have access to wound rerolls in the shooting phase built in. That's a 2-cost stratagem, gets very expensive, and the inclusion of the Demon Prince helps out quite a bit there. We also then have a Tallyman to further compound our command point economy. We have 2 Chaos Rhinos to carry the Plague Marines around, in addition to 3 Mythic Blighthollow units, 3 units of Poxwalkers for some early game utility, and then, as I mentioned before, 10 Blightlord Terminators. These guys were equipped with 2 Plague Spearers and 2 Reaper autocannons, in addition to combi bolters on the Blightlords themselves. Attaching in the Lord of Virulence, they get wound rerolls on their ranged attacks, and they're also going to get the benefit of +1 strength and AP while targeting afflicted units. You can further compound this with Blessings of Filth to give them critical 5-ups. So similar to the Plague Marine squads, you can give them lethal hits on 5s, and then those wound rerolls allow things like the Reaper autocannons to deal devastating damage slightly more reliably. On top of that, you can even pump them up to toughness 9 using Grotesque Fortitude to make them resilient against even a lot of anti-heavy infantry technology from other armies. There's a lot of strength 9, high AP 3 damage shooting coming at them that they can blank a lot of with that +2 toughness effect. Incredibly cool list. It's very cool to see Champions of Contagion on the battlefield here in place of Virulent Victorium that I feel like we see so often. However, this detachment is unique, and the inclusion of massive Blightlord Terminator bricks in place of Deathroad Terminator bricks that we would typically see is very, very cool. Now, that brings us to our final and most interesting list of the week. This one being Rowan Kennett, who went undefeated at the CanCon 40k Open with Tyranids, using a subterranean assault featuring no less than a Harridan. Now, the timing of this result is absolutely insane because I've spent literally the last week on stream playtesting various varieties of Harridan lists for play in a GT next week. So seeing that Harridan 5-0 at tournament this weekend not only feels like a betrayal, but also is incredibly ironic. With that in mind, I'm probably going to be doing a lot of content about these varieties of Harridan Tyranid lists in the next week or so, especially a list tech video if you are a patron or a YouTube channel member, where I talk in depth about the list and the particular build that I've been refining. This one is a little bit different, but includes a lot of the same technology. Now, in this case, it is being led by the Swarm Lord to generate command points and act as a command point tax. The army is, at least in the early game, tends to be very hungry for command points because you do have to fuel the Harridan in order to continuously do damage with them. We have a Biovore for scoring, a Gargoyle unit to be able to steal objectives from enemies. The big benefit here is that they can set up 6 inches away from enemy objectives using Subterranean Assault's tunnel marker mechanic, and then they can fire and move after shooting in order to steal those objectives away without having to charge or engage anyone. Incredibly useful, so all you have to do is avoid Overwatch, and if you can do that, then you can steal objectives from almost anything. From there, we have a Lictor, a Neurolictor, a single Pyrovore. He helps out the Tyrannifex that's in the list quite a bit, since the Tyrannifex at a baseline does not ignore cover, so the Pyrovore being able to strip that is good. Plus, he's just a nice little unit who can come out of a tunnel marker to act as utility or to deal some damage. We then have a pair of Ravener squads to go with the hyper-adapted Ravener unit and build tunnels for the army, plus a pair of Screamer Killers. The Screamer Killers are nice because they are relatively small base sizes, at least in comparison to a lot of other Tyranid monsters, which makes them good for coming out of tunnel markers. They can also bring a ton of 3 damage melee attacks and combo very nicely with the Neurolictor. 2 Screamer Killers gives you 2 opportunities to battle shock enemies during your shooting phase, which could potentially apply the +1 to wound effect from the Neurolictor to allow the army to punch up into higher toughness characteristics. The Screamer Killers themselves only come in at base strength 10, so they do have a little bit of trouble punching up into big, high toughness enemies. Now, the Harridan himself is a really interesting data sheet. He's a Titanic aircraft, which allows him to enter aircraft mode from the start of the game. That gives him pure true line of sight to and from the Harridan model itself, and being enormous, that allows him to basically see the entire battlefield if he is in that aircraft mode, with the downside of not being able to set up on the battlefield turn 1. Given how large it is, typically speaking, you will put the Harridan into aircraft mode because otherwise your opponent will just have line of sight to it on the top of the first turn and shoot it with their anti-tank weapons, which can be pretty problematic. However, once it's on the battlefield, the Harridan's ability to basically just shoot anything it wants to allows you to clear screens to unlock better drop points for your Raveners and your other tunneling units later. It allows you to engage with long-range units that Tyranids don't typically have great access to, and it allows you to punish large, high-value infantry units. There's nothing that a Harridan wants to shoot more than something like a Victrix Honor Guard squad. With the Subterranean Assault Detachment ability ability to place the Harridan into reserve and then pop it up from different tunnel markers around the battlefield means that it can almost always get line of sight or range to whatever it needs to. And once it emerges, being able to apply enfilading emergence to it to give it ignore cover and sustained hits makes its attacks incredibly effective. It's essentially hitting on 2s and rerolling 1s if you consider the sustained hit to be roughly equivalent to +1 to hit, and wins anything in the game on no worse than a 4, but typically on 2s or 3s. The one downside is if you low roll the attack volume on the Harridan's gun, as long as you dodge that, its attacks become very consistent. That said, it does require at least 2 command points to run every turn because you want to be hopping it into reserve or tunnel networking it between different tunnel markers to get the best avenue and to unlock the ability to enfilading emergence to get sustained hits. That costs you 2 CP, and that's why we need the Swarm Lord or a Hive Tyrant in order to run this thing. Now, alongside Tyranid's good capacity for scoring from the Raveners and from units like the Neuroelectors and the Biophore, you can keep up strong secondary scores while keeping your opponent off primary by killing them with the Harridan and contesting him with the Gargoyles, which means that unlike a lot of Tyranid armies that has to play really aggressively in order to take table space, this army can keep your opponent at arm's length while threatening charges onto their controlled objectives in the late game, but just by using the Raveners to build tunnels next to them. It plays very differently than a lot of other Tyranid builds. Rather than trying to overwhelm your opponent with massive numbers of models or regenerating models or huge numbers of monsters, it kind of plays its big game of keep away while it slowly attritions you to a point that it can break the opponent's back with an alpha strike from the Screamer Killers and the Ravener units. Absolutely insane that at the exact time I decided to re-enlist the help of Harridan, we also saw him 5-0 at GT. But it's cool to see these off-the-wall Tyranid lists doing well in a metagame where Tyranids are otherwise fairly struggling. I'm really curious to see whether or not this army has the capacity to engage with the top-tier contenders, things like Necrons and Ultramarines. Space Marine armies definitely have the ability to kill it very quickly once the Oath of Moment is applied, and if the Harridan can't escape from their weapon range, then things are going to get awkward. That said, if you are running things like Vindicators or low or shorter ranged weapon profiles, the Harridan can actually outrange them fairly well, because it's able to fire 48 inches from the back corner of your deployment zone. However, big guns like Doomsday Arcs or Repulsor Executioners will knock it down pretty quickly, since it doesn't have an invulnerable save and only comes in at toughness 10, so any high-strength dedicated anti-tank shooting is going to kill it very quickly. It's all about your capacity to dodge that shooting and continuously deal damage with the Harridan in order to be successful with a list like this. But with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to Ides of March for sponsoring this video, and big thanks to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. We've had a huge influx of new people over on the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/TacticalTortoiseTV, where I stream most weekdays live games of 40k or commentated games of 40k. Please come hang out with me over there and watch my games with Harridan and his friends, and remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.